Welcome, everyone. This is the DevOps Amsterdam meetup for March. Still entirely virtual, but we aim to change that, and more on that subject a little later. Hi, everyone. My name is Floor. I'm only one of three organizers for this meetup. Daniel and Jos are doing stuff in the background, like checking the chat and engaging with y'all, or making sure that the right banners show up at the right time, and also the speakers that are supposed to speak show up, which is great. I don't have to do any of that stuff. And today, speaking of speakers, today we'll be joined by Hidde de Vries, who is a front-end web developer and accessibility specialist, writes about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and accessibility stuff on his blog, which is hiddedevries.nl/blog. Is a long-term accessibility nerd. He said it. Like I didn't say this. I didn't write this down to be in my script. Has worked on the standard sites, and he is a WCAG editor. WAC. Can I say WAC? Hidde? He sort of nods. Nods in the background.
Yeah.
Thank you. He currently works in the developer relations team at Sanity.io and is an ex-W3C WAI person, and also ex-Mozilla. And we'll talk about shifting accessibility testing left. But before he does that, I need to talk a little bit about our code of conduct and other house ruly things. So our code of conduct is available at devopsdays.org/events/2022-Amsterdam/conduct. It would be so helpful if Daniel would now put out this banner that shows this code of conduct, so that people can, read it back, because I bet you weren't taking notes while I was, saying all of that stuff. By joining this event, you have automatically agreed to abiding by this code of conduct. And if you see anything that you think doesn't align with our code of conduct, then please reach out to me on Twitter. My DMs are open, and my handle is normally in the name thingy under or on my picture. Or you can send me an email at floordrees@gmail.com. So without further ado, Hidde, you take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Floor. Super excited to be here virtually once again in Amsterdam, speaking from Rotterdam, not too far away. And yeah, I'll be talking, as Floor said, about accessibility, which is a passion of mine. I feel like it is really important that the web is accessible, and it's kind of set up to be accessible. It's unfortunate that it isn't always as accessible as it can be. So today I want to talk about how you can make that easier by shifting left. And that's a term that's used also outside accessibility. If you think of a timeline where there's a bunch of events, if you go more to the left, then you do things earlier. So this is all about making accessibility easier by doing it earlier. Now, as Floor said, I am a developer relations person at Sanity. Sanity is really cool. You should check us out. The thing, I won't talk too much about Sanity, but what's good to know is that we make a tool for content, and we make it awesome for both people who write content and for developers. And that's a combination you don't see a lot. So yeah, if you find it interesting, check it out. Let me know what you think. Whatever, we can talk about that later. I'm also an accessibility specialist. Floor has mentioned these things. I have a blog. It's on Hidde.blog as well. I got this short URL for it. And you can actually you can't like, but you can subscribe because there is an RSS feed if you're into that sort of thing. So you can do that, put that into your RSS feed reader, and then you can stay up to date with new stuff that I'm posting. Without further ado, let's get into the accessibility. I'll give you a brief introduction of what accessibility is, because it's important to know kind of what we're talking about here, right? So accessibility, there are a lot of definitions floating around on the web, but the one that I like most is to ensure that people with disabilities can use your website or your app. And that means that you're ensuring that people with disabilities can buy your product. If you're e-commerce, if you're selling stuff, it's not accessible, people with disabilities can't come and give you money for your products. It is to ensure that people with disabilities can use your service. Because again, if your service is blocking out certain people, then they can't go and use your service. And this concerns a lot of people. This is something that people often underestimate. They'll say things like, oh, it's just about a couple of blind people. I don't know anyone who's blind, or, we don't have those visitors on our website. But if you dive kind of into the statistics or the numbers for people who have disabilities and who are accessing the web, that's a lot of people. The people with disabilities, statistically, it's sometimes a bit complex to figure out how big the group is. And that's because different countries have different definitions of disabilities, and there's different ways of looking at it. But like in the Netherlands, 1 to 2% of people is blind or visually impaired. 4% of people is colorblind, 9% is deaf or hard of hearing, and then 15% is low numerate or low literate. So there are a lot of different groups of people, and together that's like 1 in 4 or 1 or 5 of people in total. And if you're going to exclude all of these people from your website, you're missing out. That's people who are not buying your product or not using your service, and that would be unfortunate. To make it a bit more concrete, that's people who zoom in to your website. They might go to like 200 or 300% or maybe 400% to make sure they can see everything in a font size that works for them. These are people who use high contrast modes or have a screen reader that reads out everything that happens on the screen to them. People who might need audio or video transcribed, including people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Also, people who have English as their second language benefit from this sort of thing. People who do not use a mouse, could be for all sorts of reasons. Some people don't have hands, and they have other ways to interact with their computer, like voice control, which is the next one. You can use voice recognition to control the computer. And then there are people who prefer reduced motions. There are a lot of different diseases and things that happen to people in life that makes it so that motion can trigger problems in them, such as sickness and those sorts of things. So these are settings that exist on a computer, and our job as website makers is to make sure that our stuff actually works with all of these different settings and for all these different people. And yeah, they're not this small group. They are people all around us. They're our customers, they're our neighbors, and we've got to make sure that stuff works. That's what accessibility is all about. And by now you might think, okay, cool, let's dig into it. Let's have a look. How are we going to actually do this? And that's interesting. There are a lot of different things that you can look at. There are accessibility standards. You might be familiar with a standard called WCAG or WCAG. As Fleur mentioned earlier, it stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And this is a set of guidelines that is applied by governments worldwide. So if you're in Europe or in America or in China and in a bunch of other places, it's likely that your government requires websites to follow this accessibility standard. It's a set of guidelines that tells you what to do and what not to do. It's a way of kind of measuring things. I'll get into that. There's a bunch of different standards that you can look at. So within the WCAG standard, there are a bunch of different parts. So there are 4 principles. Underneath that, a bunch of different guidelines. And then within that, there are success criteria. Still with me? Yeah, it's a bit complex. There are a lot of different levels, but the success criteria are what we are going to look at. They exist in 3 different levels, single A, double A, and triple A. And then they are separated over those. Now, what is important to remember is that if you are complying with any of the laws in Europe or in the US or in many other places, you're often required to meet single A and double A, which comes down to 50 different criteria. Now, these criteria are in the WCAG standard, and you can read them there. You can also use something that is called the quick reference or how to meet WCAG. And this is a webpage that I use a lot myself when I audit websites for accessibility. It's basically the standard, but it's displayed in a way that's a lot more condensed and organized in a way. So it's really focused on what does each criterion say. and then you can use that to test that against the website. There are also other websites such as thisiswcag.com that are trying to take WCAG and explain it in an easier to read way. There's one danger with this, and that is that all of these are interpretations and they are not the actual norm. So what's in the quick reference and what's in the actual WCAG specification, that's the law, basically, like that's the rules. And then there are a lot of things that are derived from that. They are not the rules. So yes, it looks easier and it is easier to understand, but it could be that a rule is explained in a way that isn't always exactly as it says in the standard, which is good and bad, right? Because it makes it much easier to follow the guidelines, but it could mean that sometimes you're not following them exactly. But that's fine. Like these tools are there to help you understand better. So as I said, there are 50 criteria. Each of them are about issues that people with disabilities face, and each of them are testable. Now, if that's helpful, that's what we want to do here. We want to test these criteria. Some of them can be tested by humans, or all of them can be, and some of them can also, in addition, be tested by machines. For instance, a machine can do a really good job at figuring out if you have syntax errors, for instance. That's something that isn't a lot of fun to do by hand as a human. There are other things that really need humans, and we'll get into what they are in a minute. Then in addition to accessibility standards, it's also important to look at best practices because these standards, they only cover a part and they aren't about things like, does this actually work in the browser, or does this actually work in, say, an assistive technology like a screen reader or voice control? So there's this whole like compatibility story that requires you to actually go and look at, how all these browsers interpret the standards. And in the standards, it's not always very specific advice. So you want to be looking for best practices. And with that, be really careful what you adopt and look for well-tested patterns. And I was saying this because it's very common for websites and libraries to offer accessible solutions. So you might be looking for like a custom select and find a library that says, hey, we are the accessible custom select thingy. We meet all the WCAG standards and all of it. That's a lot more common for libraries to say that than for libraries to actually be that. And I'm not here to criticize anyone in particular, but that's just something to keep in mind. Like if they say it's accessible, it isn't always the case. Accessibility is nuanced because it is about people. It is about complex patterns where a lot could go wrong for real people that are trying to do real things, like things that impact their lives. So beware of patterns that claim accessibility but don't explain what they're doing and how. Two sets of good practices, and there are a lot of them online, but two of them that I'm quite impressed with are Scott O'Hara's Accessible Components repository on GitHub. Scott works in the ARIA working group, so he works quite directly with these ARIA standards, and he has a lot of accessible components that also explain why exactly they are accessible and what the parts are that you absolutely have to get right. So this is a really good repository. And then a design system from the UK government is also really good. And the reason for that is that they do a lot of research with users as well. And they talk about it online. So on their blog, they talk about what they do. They'll go like, hey, we tested this language selector thing with a group of 10 people, and most of them said this. So it's really helpful to kind of follow along, especially if your team isn't doing accessibility research on users yourselves, then it's particularly useful to have someone write all of that up. So look for best practices and be careful which ones you adopt. And then the third part of accessibility of the puzzle is user testing. I'll keep that part short as well because that's a talk on its own. But if you test with users, you want to make sure you test with a wide range of different users. One user doesn't speak for all, so don't ask like the one person in the wheelchair in your company if they're able to access your new app, but make sure that you have kind of represented samples. It's also important to allow for a lot of time. because sometimes disabled users need more time, for instance, to input text into a computer because they might need to do that by character or stuff like that. So allow for time, test only when you're ready. So make sure you kind of test the basics before you go to users. That's to save your time in the long run, because you want to make sure the baseline is right. You don't need users to point out the basic issues. And then the last one is to make sure that your lab is actually accessible. So if you're asking someone who is in a wheelchair, make sure they can actually get into the building. That's common sense, but yeah, it's something that you might forget while you're planning all this stuff. There's a real good blog post, by the way, about this called Things to Consider When Doing Usability Testing with Disabled People by the Dutch consultancy Frozen Rockets. So I recommend you check that out if you want to know more about that. So how can we test for accessibility? And one of the most common questions I get about that is, can we potentially automate it? Is there a way that we can install something on our CI/CD that will just tell us about all the accessibility issues so that we can fix them before the website goes live? That's a nice way of shifting left, because you can fix issues early on, so that's good. But basically, my answer there is usually you'll need both. You'll need both manual testing and automated tests. Automated tests are really useful because they point out stuff that, if you miss it, it will be a barrier. So it's useful to have those issues kind of pointed out. Often they are also issues that are annoying to look for, like, have I closed this div properly? You might not know, like the code might live somewhere in 6 components and it might have happened accidentally. It's no fun to go through all of the HTML that a web page has. So if you have a tool that can do that, that's great. But you also want to do a lot of manual testing, because there are a lot of things that only you can decide, because it's about things like intent, which robots and AI are not very good at. They don't know what we think or what we want yet, anyway. So there is a report that the consultancy DQ, who made a common tool for automated testing, brought out. It's called the Automated Accessibility Coverage Report. And they looked at the issues that they found automatically and then compared it to the issues that they found manually, or the reports that they gave to their clients, the full official audit reports. And it turns out, if you compare those two numbers, that the number you'll find automatically is actually quite high. So when people look at manual versus automated, they will look at, there's 50 success criteria in WCAG. How many of them are automatable? But what DQ did is actually look at how many of them that we found in real reports have we found in these automated reports. Compared that and found that actually there are a lot of issues that they found just because the issues that are automatically checkable are also more common, or at least in those sets of data. Really interesting. But yeah, the bottom line still is you want to be doing manual testing as well. So here's an example. Let's say I own a web shop where you can purchase clothes, and I've decided I'm going to give 50% off, and I hired a designer that used Photoshop to create a graphic for me that says 50% off, and it looks beautiful, but there's no way to get this in CSS because I don't have the web font and it's all really complicated. So I decided to upload a picture that is 50% off.png and put it on my website. Now, the problem here is, and that's an accessibility issue, according to WCAG, the very first success criterion is about this 111, and it's about text alternatives. So what you'll find here is that there is no alt attribute. That's an accessibility problem. A machine can establish this because the attribute is missing. It isn't there. That's end of the story. You filled this success criterion at this point. But what if there is an alt attribute, but it says 25% off, but the actual deal is 50% off? At this point, you're giving part of your users the wrong information, and maybe with buying clothes, I mean, that's a problem. But imagine it's about something that's even more sensitive, like first aid guidance or whatever, stuff like that. This example that I've used a lot in the last few years is like the Dutch Minister for Health tweeting out new guidelines around COVID, doing that as JPEG images attached to his Twitter messages, which is all meant well, but it does mean that this information is harder to find for people with disabilities or people who use a screen reader in this case. Of course, OCR exists, and it has existed for many, many years. And there are lots of features that people can use to actually get the text out of these images. But for a machine, it's really hard to decide whether it needs OCRing. And there are no tools that currently do that. So that's the simple story there. What you can do if you are using a screen reader, you can save that image and then open the app that does the image recognition and then find out what the text says. But in this case, you might not know that it's actually wrong, right? Because there is an alternative, it's just not correct. So yeah, all sorts of things that you need a human to decide, is this correct or is this not correct? Bit of a long-winded example, but this applies to many different issues within WCAG. Sometimes you will actually need someone to decide because the machines don't detect the thing. Sometimes the alternative text can also be redundant. So in this case, I have an image that says 50% off and sale, and then I have an alt text that also says that, and I have a little text underneath that says the same thing. So I'm saying it in two places, which is redundant. So in this case, I could have left the alt empty, so an empty string basically. You want to have the attribute there, but just have no content in there. Again, that's hard for a machine to decide whether the text underneath is plenty or not. Now, when it comes to manual testing, you can hire someone who does WCAG audits for you. There's a shortage of those people in many countries now because, a lot of organizations need to comply with the law and they hire people to test stuff. So there's a lot of manual testing that you can actually do yourself. And I do recommend this to most of my clients because it can also save you time when you do have a WCAG audit done. And these are all tests that I'm going to tell you about that are things that most people can do on a team and that you can do periodically. So this doesn't require a specialized accessibility person. Most people who work on your team, whether it's the designer, developer, product manager, they can all be doing this test. Okay, so the first one is use of color. If there is something that uses color on your page, like in this case, I have some text with 2 links in it, and the links are red, then the question is this not the only way? What you want to make sure is that there are more ways than just the color to distinguish stuff. So in this case, the links are only distinguished by color. The only way to know that they are links is that they have a different color. So that's a WCAG failure. And what you want to see is something that is extra on top of the color, like an underline. So this is something that anyone on the team can check. If there is a color used for something, whether that's in like a bit of data visualization or other things, if color is the only way something is distinguished, then that's not enough. Another one, page titles. They exist in your head element, if you're familiar with HTML. There's a title element there. The contents of that are actually really important for people with certain disabilities. For instance, if you use a screen reader and you go to a page, it's going to put that information right at the front. So it's going to read out the contents of the title tag. It will also display it in your tab. This used to be a bit more prominent in older browsers, and now it's kind of in the tab. On mobile, you don't usually even see it. That's fine, but what you want to make sure is there a title? That's one check. Sometimes the title's missing for some reason. And then the second check is, does it actually describe the page? So is it an accurate description of what's going on the page? And if you have like 10 pages, is there any way to distinguish them with the title only? Again, this is something everyone on the team can check. And there's nothing wrong with this IKEA page, by the way. I just use it as some neutral example of a web page. Then there's keyboard checks that you can do, which is the check, can I get to all of the interactive elements on a page? And interactive elements are elements that you can click on usually. So there are inputs and anchors, buttons, text areas, anything in the form. So anything that you can click on, can I actually get there with with the keyboard? And then the second check is, can I do everything with the keyboard? So if you have a conference and you're selling tickets, can I actually go and purchase tickets with the keyboard? If you're asking me where I live, can I select that with just the keyboard? All those sorts of things. So you want to make sure all of the flow works with only the keyboard. And you're testing here for people who can't use a mouse. It could be that they're using a keyboard. It could be that they're using some other specialized piece of hardware that works better for them. Another check that you can do for keyboard is, can I see where I am? So when you are using the tab key and there are links in your content, what you want to see is some way that indicates which link you're currently on. So in this case, I've drawn a border around a link, which indicates I'm on this link. When I press enter, I'm going to follow that link. And it means I'm not on the other link. And if I press tab, I am on the other link. So I want to see that this distinguished, like where am I currently at and what's going to happen when I press enter or go or whatever. So yeah, that's another check. So for keyboard, you want to make sure you can get to all the interactive elements and you can see where you are. The order makes sense. Are you not trapped? Tap index is an interesting one. You probably want to use DevTools for that. Is there anything with tap index attribute that's more than 0? That's a red flag. And also, is there nothing in the tab order that shouldn't be there? Sometimes people will put their headings in the tab order. They shouldn't be. It's only for interactive elements, so anything that you would normally click on if you were using a mouse. Then images. I mentioned images before. The question to ask here, the check to do is, do all of your images have an alt attribute? And then the second is the alt actually appropriate? So sometimes you can leave it empty. Sometimes it doesn't contain everything that's in the image. And sometimes maybe you just want to imagine, what if this image was broken? I would get the alt text. Would that actually give me the same information? Another thing to look out for is when the image is the only thing that's inside a link. And that's often the case with the logo of your website. What's good to know about that is that the alt attribute of your image will then become the name of the link if you haven't done anything more fancy. And that's interesting because that means when you use like a screen reader and you get to that link, it's going to read that out. So it's useful if the alternative text actually has something like homepage in it, if this is a link that goes to the homepage. If you have videos on a page, again, something that everyone can check. Are they captions and are they correct? That's a bit long-winded to actually go and do because it means you need to watch the whole video. It's something that everyone can do on a team. Is everything that's visible in the video also in audio is another check to be doing for videos. Then for audio, you want to make sure that everything in audio is also available as text. That might sound like common sense, but again, it's something that friends with disabilities often have problems with. Like there is Takuba, who is a front-end developer from the Netherlands, and she's also deaf. Now, she wrote on her blog about she loves podcasts, and they were increasingly more popular when there was lockdown. But for her, it was actually really hard to access the podcast because many of them didn't have transcripts available, or they had a lot of time in between the episode and transcript. So yeah, she finds that really, really annoying. The blog post I'm linking here, by the way, is really interesting to read because she worked with a bunch of students in Amsterdam to figure out what would be really good ways to display transcripts with podcasts. But yeah, again, if you organize a podcast, you probably get someone to arrange your audio or design your artwork. Also get someone to do your captions or your transcripts because, yeah, people want to access your content. The section that they are heading off. So if there is a bit of content with a heading above, you want to make sure they actually connect well. So yeah, sometimes in marketing websites, the heading doesn't mean much. And the reason that this is important is that a lot of screen reader users actually use the headings as like a table of contents for your website. So they will pull up a list of all the headings and then jump to the heading that sounds interesting or has like the information that they are likely looking for. For headings, it's also important to check if all the headings are marked up with a heading text. So if you have a div that has a bunch of tailwind classes, that's not enough because that's not a heading text. So you want to make sure it's like H1 or H2 or H3, any of those basically. Something else that most people can check is zoom. So when you zoom in, say like to 400%, you want to make sure that everything works. And working includes that text doesn't overlap, the text isn't cut off. That's a common one that, part of a word falls off or something like that. That all the controls are actually usable and that there is no scrolling horizontally and vertically at the same time. That would also be an accessibility issue. Then let's jump to color modes. Windows has a high contrast mode and you can actually check for that. Again, make sure that everything works. I built a website a few years ago that had a lot of SVGs in it and they didn't work in high contrast mode because I wasn't using current color for people who are into that. That's an issue, and the QA people found it because I hadn't bothered to check in high contrast mode. So make sure that actually everything works. In the latest version of Edge, they've introduced something that emulates high contrast mode so that if you're on a Mac, that you can also check there. Then screen readers, you can also try and use screen readers to test websites. Do realize though that if you're not a regular screen reader user, you have to add a pinch of salt, sorry. Don't jump to conclusions too quickly because the thing that might seem weird to you might be not so weird. And then there are also common browser and screen reader combinations, and it's good to look those up before you test. So, for instance, Safari and VoiceOver work well together, but Chrome and VoiceOver don't. And then whether it works also depends on user skill, and not all of your users are tech savvy. Then you can do semi-automated testing. That's exciting because it can help you make some decisions a bit quicker. For instance, in the Firefox DevTools, there's a bunch of things that you can run from the accessibility panel that they have in there. For instance, you can visualize tab order by pressing a button, and it's going to put some numbers with each of the things that are in tab. So you can verify if the order makes sense and you're not jumping from top to bottom all the time. There's also a thing that can check for contrast, for keyboard, for labels, all these sorts of things. And you can simulate color deficiencies like different types of color blindness, as well as contrast loss. Another thing that you can do semi-automatically is put your website into the HTML validator and find out what's missing. You can also install things in your React project or other JavaScript frameworks that will check your HTML syntax for you. There is also a tool called Wave that you can run on a website, and it's going to give you a list of all the accessibility issues that it can find. For instance, area abuse and all these sorts of things. Then lastly, the last thing that you can do in terms of testing is automated testing. So you can run tests against your website automatically in CI/CD. And that's really exciting. I find that really helpful. We've just seen that some things are difficult for machines to test, but a lot of things are not so difficult. So you can use X, you can use Tenant, Siteimprove. There's a bunch of different tools that offer similar advantages. It will give you reports. If you want to dig a bit deeper into that, the folks at Gov.uk have done a comparison of different auditing tools that they've done, and they've compared that on a website that they standardized and tested all these different tools on. So that's interesting to look at. And then lastly, I want to tell you about when to test, and that might not come as a surprise. When to test is basically as soon as you can. It's easier when you do it earlier, and that is because it's a lot cheaper to fix something while you're still developing it. If you forget to close that div, and the dev tools tell you about it immediately, or your code editor does, then that's a cheap fix to make. That also means you should probably pick a CMS that supports accessibility. So pick one that has accessibility in mind and helps you with that. To check designs before you start building them, to check builds before merging them, and also to check the code before shipping it. So in all these different stages, you can look at accessibility, have someone involved who knows a bit about accessibility, or do those kind of manual tests that I talked about before that anyone on the team can do. And you can do that in a lot of different stages too. So in conclusion, you want to do often and early do manual checks that most people can do and run your automated tests. And then once in a while, you can hire an expert that will do like a proper WCAG audit. They can give you a report and like do all the different detailed reporting things. And you can run user tests with people with disabilities. So you can combine those kind of things together. That way, have your accessibility sorted in two ways, both often and early and also once in a while. So yeah, in summary, what you want to do, standards, best practices, and user testing. You can use a whole bunch of different tools for that in your browser, in software, and in your CLI. And you can do it at 2 times, right? Often, all the time, and periodically, depending on what you're trying to do. And with that, I want to thank you very much for having me. I think I'll be answering some questions too if they have popped up in the chat while I was talking. Oh, and one thing, I'll be sharing the slides. So the slides are already on talks.hiddetofreeze.nl, and you can find them there as well as the links that I have mentioned.
Awesome. Thank you, Hidde. Maybe you can share the link to that bit on your website in the chat later on if you can. That'd be awesome. I found a couple of others, like the one the podcast transcript experiment. If you can, I couldn't find a link for it that quickly. So if you can place that in there as well, because I would be super interested in reading that one.
Yeah, I've just put it into the chat for you, and the links are all there.
Awesome.
So.
I think that's our private chat, but we'll share it in the comment chat later. Awesome.
Cool.
I didn't find any or I didn't see any questions just yet, but maybe they'll come up while we're talking because I have a question. So you mentioned somewhere in the beginning of your talk to test with a group of diverse users. How do you do that without ending up with like you said, the only like visibly disabled person in the office? So to name an example, and I thought it was really brave. You'll share it in the chat that he is colorblind, and so usually when we're putting something out for DevOps Days, Amsterdam or Eindhoven, or for these meetups, we ask him if he can actually like see it. But of course, like you mentioned, also like there's such a variety in things like being colorblind. Like how do you find such a group of people to test things?
Yeah, that's hard. Like, I think we're lucky that there are a lot of ways that we can test for these things that don't involve like users. So like you can actually run like color deficiency checks and stuff like that. Yeah, it's hard. There are specialized recruiting agencies for this. So just like for user tests, you can have a recruitment agency that will find like representative samples for you. That also exists for people with disabilities, but it's harder, especially because there are a lot of disabilities, and you might want to focus like on one group, like do that sort of thing at one test session, and then do another group at another session. That sort of thing might help, but yeah, that's pretty tricky. Which I think is why it's good we have all these other methods as well available to us.
Cool, interesting. From your work as a consultant, what do you when you come to a customer, like what do you find that they most surprised about when you tell them that they're not doing a certain thing or they're not doing a certain thing right?
That's an interesting question. So I'm trying to think what I recently encountered. So one of the things that many people don't know is how much names matter in your interface. So the words that are inside a link, for instance, that they actually make quite a big difference for someone who uses a screen reader, just because they use those names to actually figure out what to click on, more than sighted users do, because that distinction is harder to make if you don't have the context around it. That's one thing maybe, and the other probably is focus indicators. People love to remove those. So that's a thing where you can see, like, am I on this link? Am I on that button? Where you do a little outline. It's very common for those to be removed by a designer or by someone on the team. And they're surprised to hear, hey, that's actually being used by quite a lot of different people.
Cool. And then also when you interact with customers, who is mostly, I don't know, who owns accessibility? Like, what is the group of or the department that reaches out to you?
Yeah, so that's a bit of a debate, I guess. Like, it often lands on the plate of a developer. It often lands on the plate of a designer who happens to be passionate. But if you want to do it well, it's going to be with everyone on the team. It's going to be a shared responsibility. And then maybe you'll have one or two people who are like designated accessibility people, or like coordinate some of the process around it. But generally, it's going to be with everyone, because each of the different roles on the team has some input. Like, if you design something that's perfectly accessible, but it's built in an inaccessible way, that doesn't work, right? Or when your content is super accessible, but it is displayed in an inaccessible template, or when your CMS doesn't work well. So, like, it's all these different things that come together. So basically, everyone on the team is the boring answer to that, basically.
Well, I was afraid that you were going to say it depends. So this is much better.
Right.
Also, let me check real quick, but I don't think we have any more questions. So then with that, I would like to thank you very, very much for coming on and speaking at this meetup. I thought it was a really interesting talk to have at a DevOps meetup, very important topic as well. So thank you, Hidde.
Thanks so much.
Please hang out in the chat.
Will do.
Awesome. And then I want to invite our next speaker to the virtual stage. So François, hey François. I know you from doing solutions architecty stuff at Ivan.io, where I work as well. And you're going to talk about monitoring that cares, or the end of user-based monitoring today. You describe yourself as a cat herder in your daily life, but you're also a support and operations engineer by trade who loves talking about DevOps. You came to the right place. Support, monitoring, and why soft skills are important. So without further ado, please.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely the cat herder. I have 5 cats at home so far. So that's probably going to be a bit more soon. I'm actually the one who needs convincing, just to be safe. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. And whoop. Generally, someone else does that for me, obviously. Here we go. So yeah, I was about to ask if anyone can see it, but yeah, that's the problem with streamed event. So generally, I start this talk by asking people to raise their hands. So right now, there's going to be only me, which is, have you missed any one or more alerts? Yes, I did. Have you missed any outages or degraded service? Did you ever come on a Monday morning where the situation pretty much looked like this? Yeah, it happened to me. It's like, people are like, where were you this weekend? What did you do? I'm like, I don't know. No one called me. I thought everything was fine. And again, I'm not shaming anyone. This happened. We all take pride in our jobs. We really do not want to give the impression that we don't care about services, that we don't care about uptime. Just sometimes we just don't watch for the right stuff. We're all taking that job very, very seriously. But the question is, why are we even on call to begin with? Well, generally, it's because someone is using the service, right? You don't just get paid in the middle of the night out of some kind of weird kink where you actually like living on 2 hours of sleep. Outages have real life consequences, whether you're selling a product or even offering the service for free, whether you're not for profit or a public service. Not that long ago, back in Australia, the emergency service phones were down for almost 10 hours. Now, imagine, for instance, a suicide hotline being down in the middle of the night. Yeah, I know, that's getting really dark. We'll move away from the dark stuff for a bit. So the main problem is, so why are we not getting those alerts? Don't we know when the service is down? Well, one of those is, there's 3 types of lies: lies, damn lies, and service status page. Like, how many times are you aware of an outage, let's say, for AWS on Twitter before it's even acknowledged on their service status page? Yeah, quite a lot. But we don't really care about shaming big company publicly because everyone has outages. That's the reason why there's hug-ups and everything, right? The reason is why we don't pay attention to those. Well, the first one is, for instance, that the dashboard is full of orange and red. So when everything is critical, well, nothing truly is really. Like, if everything's down, do you care about a specific service or not? No, you just know that everything is red. It's always been red. So why would you care about it now? Another reason is, do you even understand your system? Do you know what the flashing light is doing? Some people might get the reference here. But yeah, do you understand your systems? Does anyone at work does? What are the key services? Or are they monitored? Are they even monitored? And deep down, you know that needs to change. If your customers or your users are not happy, something needs to change, or otherwise your customers are going to change, and probably not for the better. First step, like everything, is accepting you have a problem. This is not fine. Everything is on fire. The dashboard is completely useless. We don't measure the right things. The users are not happy. We have outages we're not even aware of. Okay, we're aware of all of that now. How do we fix it? Like, where do we go from there? Well, for starters, don't start coding straight away. Do you even know what you're fixing? Yes, you know what to monitor. How do you do it? You don't know. If you don't know what you're trying to achieve, then why are you already coding something to detect it? What's the best way to achieve that? Well, I would suggest going it alone, not telling anyone, make it your personal mission, never accept help. Thank you for coming from a TED Talk. No, it's a DevOps meetup. Of course, you're asking for some help. You don't work alone. It's not a talk about, oh, I'm super genius who fix everything everywhere and I never needed any help. I'm barely a casual helper at this stage. What you need to do is you build of every people strengths rather than getting a team of all A players, for instance. You just build everyone's strengths. Like this one is a reference to a MMO called Final Fantasy 14. You have attack classes or DPS, which have high damage output, low defense, limited healing capacity. You have the tanks, which can soak up a lot of damage, can't do much healing, can't do much damage. And then you have the healer, which, well, heals, obviously. Now, if you put all of them together in the same party, then you can pretty much achieve anything that you could not achieve by yourself. And I get that video games is not always everyone's cup of tea. So, for instance, football, if you put 11 players in defense, well, that's not going to work, right? Or more recently, for instance, rugby. If you put everyone in offense, it's not going to work either. So what's a successful strategy? Why is our first solution to try and fix it alone? Why are we not reaching to other teams? And to best find if you're the right person for the job, I'm going to quote Alice Golfos from Monitorama 2017. What's an actionable alert? Something breaks, customer notice, I'm the best person to fix it, I need to fix it immediately. Who can help you achieve that? Who can help you turn your alerts into actionable alerts? For instance, the first point, something breaks. What do you call broken? What is working? How do you define the two? You want to monitor and alert, obviously, on behavior that is unexpected or out of the ordinary. So you need first to define ordinary. What works for Google, for instance, might not work for you. What works for you might not work for another smaller or bigger company. Who else in the company you know has extensive knowledge about baseline performance, for instance? Have you tried asking QA or performance engineers? Those people honestly know exactly what the software is supposed to do, how fast it's supposed to do it, and which way it's supposed to do it. I have a personal anecdote on that, actually. Back in the day when I was still an operation engineer, I was trying to monitor a SAML login process because it was part of the contract requirement that we guaranteed a specific uptime for the login process, and we had to prove that the login process actually worked. So not just that the page is up, that you could actually log in. So obviously, I'm like, well, I need to pipe that into Nagios, so I'm going to do it with like Perl or Bash or something like that, and use curl behind the scenes and pull things. And turns out doing SAML with curl is really, really, really hard. Like SAML does not like curl, and curl does not like SAML at all. So I spent a few days on that. Obviously, I'm hitting an impasse, and so I asked QA, so how do you even test the login process? Like, how do you test performance of that? Because clearly you can't run thousands of logins manually by clicking on stuff. And that's when he told me, oh, well, yeah, we use JMeter. It's really good for that. So I'm like, okay. And so I looked at it and it's like, oh, it's graphical. I can't use graphical. Turns out you can still use it headless. And yeah, that was great. Like I had my full login process end to end, loading the page, patching in login, password, redirect, everything in like 3 lines of bash. And I could run that every minute on the dot. That was perfect. So first lesson, always ask for help from QA. They will know stuff that you will never ever imagine. The second point, someone noticed. If your service crashed in the middle of the forest and no one uses it, is it actually crashed? Do you have actually any visibility in your user issues? Do you know when they're using the service? Do you know how they're using the service? Do you know who knows that? Well, generally, support does. Like, is there any pathways or communication between your SRE team and your support team to provide information on outages? Are they aware of when new features are being released? Do they know what they're supposed to do? Do they know if they change something, if the feature breaks older behavior, and vice versa? Because they could be like, hey, since we released that new feature, we got much more cases regarding this particular problem. It's very much it's very likely that it's linked together and we should probably do something about that. So just because you don't hear yourself about it doesn't mean it's not broken. It's probably that you're not listening to the right people. And do you also access to your customer feedback from sales or reports from your customer success team or from your support? What are the problems they see week after week? Is there something you could fix quickly that would be a big win? Sometimes it can be something really easy, like, hey, people are confused because the button to delete is on the wrong side compared to the button for cancel. If you just swap those two around, we would get a lot less case of files deleted by accident. That's always a good one. So You know what's broken, you know how it's impacting customers. Now you go and you're going to monitor it. Are you the best person to fix that? So sometimes you inherit an existing systems, and devs can you help understanding that. But they're saying, like, imagine you get something like that. Well, the web equivalent of that. What's important in there? What are the key services? Should you monitor every of the service? Does the dev even know what you should monitor? Do they know what's critical, what's not very important at all? What's not even in use anymore, but we still spin it as part of the service because, well, no one really asked for it. It's even better if you get the dev on board and you can literally get that and see, that's why it's a DevOps talk. If you can get dev and ops working on that straight from the beginning, adding things like tracing, login, A/B testing, observability, like if you actually know what to look for from the beginning, it's obviously it's where it works the best because you put your alerting straight into the software itself and you know exactly what you should be watching for. The thing is, and the fourth point is that even an outage, you could take it the other way, right? If you take steps to mitigate errors on deployed codes, outages are less likely to happen. So for instance, is the software supportable? Is there any regression in the code? Can you hide it behind a feature flag? Can you, will that new feature trigger existing monitoring alerts, for instance? Do you need more A/B testing before so you can see, hey, those 5% that use the new features are actually causing us to use way more CPU and memory than before. So we should probably get back to the drawing board and optimize that a bit. So it's great. You know that your monitoring doesn't work, you know you need to fix it. And it's like, all right, so where do I start, right? Now imagine you have your web service is like a car. Would you imagine yourself driving a car if the dashboard would light up on any failure on any of those parts? No, generally you have check engine lights. It's like, well, yeah, but the engine is lots of parts. Yeah, but at least you know the engine's not right. Check oil, check tire pressure. That's pretty much most of what you need with a car, right? You don't need to know that, yes, maybe the timing belt is a bit loose, or yeah, your brake pad is a bit way too close to be worn off, and maybe you should fix that. No, you know, well, there's a problem. It just told me, hey, there's a problem. You put that aside and look at it. Unfortunately, you can't do that with your services. You can't just be like, all right, I'm just going to turn everything down and have a quick look at it. Because, yeah, that's not how it works. It's like trying to fix the engine while the car is running. Obviously, that's the end of the metaphor. It's not working well. So what's really easy for monitoring is easier if you already know how it ends, right? If you know what the service looks like when it's healthy, you can just monitor the end result. If it's not what you expect, there's something wrong anywhere in the chain for that. But at least you have an idea. Let's say, for instance, instead of checking if the web page returns 200, which is great, but maybe not very useful, you could check, for instance, if it says, welcome to my website. Like if that string is actually displayed, then yes, at least you know you're not getting a fake 200, or that the website actually displayed where it should be displayed. Or even better, if it says welcome your name, which is the name of your test user, that's even better. So first, the way I recommend to do it is basically you monitor your end result. Like for instance, my page returns the string I'm looking for. And then you add context to your alerts. Like if it's not returning the strings, then what's the state of the service along the way? And if any service is down, then what's the context being that? Like what's the disk space usage? What's the CPU usage? Is there any relevant logs? But instead of putting all of that at once, you just provide it when it's relevant. Obviously, it's not going to be easy. Like I think one way I've seen people do that is literally using A/B testing for their monitoring, where basically they have the old system running in parallel with the new system. So at least they're sure they're not missing anything. And they can compare the result regarding false positive and false negatives. Another great way to do that is to basically fix the cause for alerts. So especially if you have lots of false positives, it's going to be off. Like at first, you're going to have more alerts because you increase your monitoring coverage. So you will have to actually start tracking all of those. You can't just be like, well, I got woken up again every day this week. And people are like, what for? And you'll be like, I slept 3 hours last night. I don't know. No, you need to log recurring issues, gather weekly reports or monthly reports or even daily reports, depending on how many alerts you get. With all your alerts, analyze which one comes the most so you can prioritize work. Continue gathering reports of what you don't cover, understand why it's not covered. Like a stupid example, we kept getting pinged for a login page that would take more than 10 seconds to load, and we never could reproduce the issue. And only by logging this alert, and especially the time and geographical location where it arrived, we found that the certificate provider we used was not present by default in some browsers. And as a result, the login page, for it to load properly, the browser had to do some external verification on the certificate, which was increasing the whole loading time by 10 seconds. Just updating that certificate with a new CA just fixed everything. Sometimes it's easy, but again, if you don't gather reports and context on your alerts, you wouldn't know because we're like, yeah, it just happened every day at 2 a.m. We don't know why. Just, it's just one thing that just mute it and tell them you're going to look at it. It's not going to work. And obviously, it's a lot of work. Like, I mean, you're supposed to keep the service running and work with developers and also get your monitoring up to scratch and also, help with a big feature that's going to be rolled soon and also fix the last outage. It's not going to be fixed. What you can do though is treat it like you would treat any other future project. Ask business analyst, product manager, anyone whose competency is to help you cut down work into manageable chunks. Like, yes, if you have a big epic that says fixed monitoring, that's going to be great. But I don't know for you, for me, it's like a mountain. I'd be like, well, I wouldn't know where to start. And so, but if they tell you, well, just get to the first refuge, like, okay, yeah, I can do the first refuge. And then from tomorrow, we can see where we're going. And that's the same right there. Obviously, that means meetings. I know people hate meetings. Guess what? Everyone hates meetings, not just IT. We're not the only one who needs uninterrupted focus time, right? But the thing is, can we get some buy-in from the exec team? Can we get buy-in from finance, for instance? We need to actually, build alliances, forge friendships, and be like, you can't just walk in at the office and be like, well, I need you, and you to help me on my team. And you definitely cannot say, oh, meeting sucks. Well, yeah, this sucks, but sometimes that's the best way to get everyone on the same page. And speaking of finance, well, as I like to say, not everything is a price, but everything has a cost. Try to quantify with sales and finance how much effort that would cost versus how much it would bring. Like if you put an actual number on it, you will get a lot more buy-in, right? How many lost sales, how many SLA credits, how many cost in licenses or recurrent subscription. Let's say you're using 3 times as much CPU as you should. What are your cloud costs? That's a big one. It's even worse. Like, remember we got really dark fast earlier? Imagine the emergency service or the suicide hotline goes down. How much would a life cost? What's the price of a life, right? So again, it really depends what you're doing, but there's some website, for instance, if they go down, it costs like literally millions of dollars per second. I'm sure if you tell them, hey, if we could invest only half that to get that fixed for good, they would definitely pay that. Can you even mandate something like a code freeze? Probably not. I know people really don't like those code freeze. If not, can you work with engineering towards set time for bug fixes, like maybe the equivalent of 10% time or hack days to fix the top 10 bugs, for instance? Is there a task force that can pay down technical debt? All the stuff that says, well, we know it's broken, we just never had time to fix it. Well, is there a way to take the time to fix it? And basically, all I'm trying to achieve with this is because most of the time people mention that DevOps is mostly Dev and Ops. And now there's like DevSecOps and DevFinOps. But the thing is that a company is a whole. And yes, even people that sometimes do not have an immediate impact on your daily work can help. Dev, Ops, support, quality, performance analysis, sales, finance, business analyst, project manager. All of them can combine the Voltron of user happiness. Don't stop at DevOps. Get all the way down to, company ops, right? Get everyone involved, listen to what they have to say, and they will in turn listen back to you. And if you have any question, now would be the time.
Awesome. Thank you, François. Like exactly at the moment where I'm having a sneezing attack, but we'll see how it goes.
Sorry.
So thank you so much for your talk. I have two questions while people in the chat are figuring out what they want to ask you. One question is, what tools do you use in order to support your on-call setup? If it's not tools, you can also name snacks.
So I will tell you what really, really saved me back in the day is having a guest bedroom for on-call. I can tell you that where only one of you is cranky at night because they didn't sleep, it's so much better than when both of you are cranky, especially if you're with a light sleeper as well. Yes, I can try K6 as well. Yes.
Don't read the chat now. Read the chat later.
But yeah, no. In terms of snacks, back in Australia, I was very, very big on energy drinks, especially for those 2 hours phone calls. The thing is, do not ever, ever, ever set your ringtone to be, or even your on-page alert as a ringtone or anything, or any kind of earworm. Because every time you're going to be like,
there's like anxiety.
Wait, did that just, no. Wait, that sounds kind of, no, maybe, no. Just set it, like literally what I've been doing, for instance, is I set it up to be a foghorn because I live nowhere near the sea. And so at least, if I hear the foghorn, I know it's an actual alert and not a boat walking past. If you live next to a train line, I don't suggest the train bell. That is a terrible idea. Don't do that. That's literally you get PTSD, especially if your customers can be a bit gnarly.
This is very solid advice. I'm taking notes.
Yeah. But for the tool, whichever works for you, some people still use pagers. If it works, it's great because, that way you can actually get anywhere when you have phone coverage rather than data coverage. If you can have a multi-regional team, works really great. Like if you have a follow the sun team, that means your on-call is actually more or less your day business hours. So for instance, back at GitHub, when we were on call, unfortunately not the SRE, but at the support, my on-call was roughly I think in winter it was 9 to 5, and in summer it was 10 to 6. So even if you work the weekend, at least you know you're not woken up in the middle of the night. You know that after your work day, you're done. And similarly, we even had a rotation during the week, so that the weekdays rotation was actually for all the people that were online at that time, not just a person on call. So that way that avoids that someone works literally 15 days in a row because, 5 days on call, 2 days on call, another 5 days of work. It's like, you know what?
Yeah.
No, that's it. I'm done. I'm not doing anything.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Another question. Sorry. Do you have maybe maybe have a template that you can share how you do reporting with stakeholders that are maybe not technical but hold a credit card?
Yeah. Generally, you need to check your sales contract. The sales contract is great for that because in the sales contract, generally, there's a clause for uptime and SLA credits or SLO credits, depending on whether it's objective or targets or actual agreement for uptime. So for instance, if you're like, yes, we're going to give you back X thousands of dollars for every second past 2 hours, or for every minute past 30 minutes in a month, well, you're cut off, right? And you can tell, well, we had a 3 hours outage. It's literally cost us X amount of dollars times Y customers. And I know the salary of one of our engineers on average that much. For a week of work, we could avoid all of that. So it's mostly Excel spreadsheet at this point. It's really it's like that scene from Fight Club. It's like, if it costs that much to recall the car and there's that amount of car and settling out of court costs us that much. If A is bigger than C, then we don't recall. It's like, okay. So it's getting really, really dark.
Well, okay. Let's see if we can make it a little bit lighthearted. You mentioned at one point company ops. So how do you think about having sort of the multidisciplinary teams to also work on call? So if a certain alert where you need expertise from different departments, is that something that ever happened to you at a company that you worked in?
I did not, but I wish it would. For what we call generally red accounts, either people that are about to churn or the one that brings in 6, 7, 8 figures, the big ones. Generally, it goes all the way to the CEO anyway. So, sometimes they literally have the CEO's phone number. And then the CEO is like, who's working on that? I better hope that everyone's working on that. And so you get sales on the call, which is like, where are we at with the customers? And then you get CSM on the call, which is like, where are we at with the customers? Then you get the poor guy, which is super, is like, please don't fire me. I didn't do nothing.
I'm a good person. All right. Cool. Fair. We have a question from the chat. With the modern tools around canary releases, why would you use Would you still use a merge freeze? Would anyone still use a merge freeze? I don't understand the question.
Generally, when I saw merge freeze or code freezes or something, it's more like a knee-jerk reaction. Like, we got too many outages recently, so no more releases unless it's bug fixes for a week. Or there's also big companies, like big retail companies, which is like, no new code for a week before Black Friday. If you commit new code, you're fired. Because it's Black Friday. Black Friday is literally billions of dollars for every minute of downtime. Again, it's code freeze. It can mean several things. Yes, it can be, in this case, a merge freeze, or it can just be rather than focus on future work, or about we actually take a week and feature on the backlog, for instance, those thousands of errors that have been submitted by support and no one did anything about it. Or that massive backlog of issue where people are like, I'd like it if the link was actually more accessible. And people are like, I don't have time. It's literally 5 minutes to change the color. Okay. Just pass it in the tools. Look if it actually visible for someone who's colorblind. See what I'm doing? And done. But it's not in my epic or something. Well, make it part of your epic.
Yeah, I love how you connected the talks together. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm also hard of hearing myself, so definitely can relate. And I can tell you, never ever use a spiral transition for someone with vertigo. This is the worst. Like, I can tell you firsthand, do not do that ever.
Also noted. I think one more question, unless something pops up in the chat. But you're on call and you wake up at 3 a.m. And you need to fix something. Are you just putting a bandage on it, something, or like how do you? Or are you expected to actually like fix something?
It depends on the case. It's one of those cases. If you're 100% confident, you know the problem, you can fix it in a timely manner, then for sure do it. And sometimes the fix can just be, I'm going to reboot the machine and see tomorrow. That's a fix. That's an acceptable fix. You could be like, you know what? I'm just going to restart the service and put it as first thing to do tomorrow morning. That's a very, very valid fix. Sometimes it is a bit more elaborate than that. But generally, if you feel that it's way over your head at this point, you should basically page someone else. Like, Misery loves company, right? Why should you be the only one awake at 3 in the morning? Or even better, if you're working in a multinational company, just pick someone who's already awake.
Right.
It's like, yeah, I mean, for instance, like if you're in the US right now, for instance, or even better, if you're in Europe right now, like we all are, the Australians will be coming online in about in about
time zones.
In about 2 hours, more or less. So, imagine you get pinged around 10 midnight your time. You can ask an Australian colleague who might not be on call, but it's like, hey, are you familiar with Service X? Is it supposed to do that? Is there a workaround, or should I fix it right now? Like, don't be a hero. No one likes heroes. You know what happens to heroes? They die alone.
With their underwear over their spandex. Anyway, thank you, François, for a wonderful talk. I didn't see any more questions, so I think we'll end it at that. Also, it's a nice time to, do my parting words, and then we all have a little bit of an evening left here in, our time zone. So thank you so much for joining today.
Anytime.
Awesome. I'll hold you to that. I warn you. And for everyone watching from home or wherever, if you're doing public streaming on a terrasje, that's also allowed. Please save the dates for our next meetup. We're meeting up in person on April 4th, which is already quite soon, actually. I think I prepared it better. Look at that. And we'll be joined by Julie Gunderson, who is a senior reliability advocate at Gremlin, and also a founding member and an organizer of another DevOps chapter. So, we need to give her the stage. And of course, there's also another event coming up that is DevOps Days Amsterdam in June 22nd till 24th. If you follow that link, you'll find that we are selling tickets already. The CFP is closed and we're working on the program, so that should be released pretty soon. But you can trust us, we throw a really pretty great event. So if you want to benefit from those early bird prices, you still can until the end of this month. That was it for us today. Thank you so much for joining. Please join us next time, maybe in person.